Have you ever had the feeling that no matter how hard you work, the finish line keeps moving? That you're running faster than your parents ever did, yet somehow getting further behind? That this isn't just bad luck or bad timing, but something deeper, structural, and quietly unfair? Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid saying out loud. An entire generation built a system that worked perfectly for them, and then locked it in place behind them. Not because they were evil, not because they wanted to hurt their children, but because incentives reward short-term comfort, not long-term responsibility. And the bill for those choices is coming due now. This isn't a rant about boomers bad, young people good. That's lazy thinking. This is about math, policy, and incentives, and how decisions made decades ago reshaped the future in ways that younger generations were never given a vote on. Let me show you how it happened. Start with this simple fact. The economic rules that built middle-class wealth in the second half of the 20th century no longer exist. Cheap housing, stable pensions, rising wages, low education costs, a growing workforce supporting a smaller retired population. That was the environment boomers entered adulthood in. But instead of adapting the system as the world changed, it was frozen in time, optimized to protect those already inside it. And that's where the problem begins. Let's talk about housing, because housing is the clearest example of how opportunity turned into extraction. When boomers bought homes, housing was treated as shelter first, investment second. Prices tracked incomes. A single salary could buy a house. Zoning was flexible. Supply expanded when demand rose. Then something changed. Homeowners discovered that restricting supply made their assets more valuable. Zoning laws tightened. Construction slowed. Neighborhood character became a shield against new development. Housing stopped being a place to live and became a financial instrument. And the people who benefited most were the ones who already owned. Younger generations didn't vote for that system, they inherited it. Now, a home isn't priced based on what people earn. It's priced based on what banks are willing to lend and what existing owners want to protect. The result? Record home values and record exclusion. Next comes debt. Boomers were told to borrow modestly, pay it down, and retire with dignity. Education was cheap enough that debt was optional. Medical costs were manageable. Wages rose fast enough to make repayment easy. Then policies shifted. Student loans became non-dischargeable. Healthcare became privatized and inflated. Credit became abundant and aggressively marketed. Debt turned from a temporary tool into a permanent condition. And again, younger generations didn't choose this structure. They were born into it. But debt alone doesn't break a system. Demographics do. Here's the quiet math nobody likes to confront. Social Security and public pensions only work when there are many workers supporting fewer retirees. When boomers were young, that ratio was massive in their favor. Now it's collapsing. Fewer workers, more retirees, longer lifespans, higher medical costs. Instead of adjusting benefits gradually, governments kicked the can forward. Politicians promised everything to everyone and postponed the pain. Why? Because boomers vote in massive numbers. So, benefits were protected, taxes were deferred, debt filled the gap. And who holds that debt? Younger generations. They didn't vote for those promises. They weren't alive when the contracts were written, but they are expected to honor them anyway. This is how the future gets stolen, not with malice, but with delay. And then there's inflation. Inflation isn't just rising prices, it's a silent transfer of wealth. Boomers largely held assets, homes, stocks, bonds. Inflation inflates asset values. Younger generations hold liabilities, rent, loans, variable costs. Inflation eats purchasing power. So when money is printed to stabilize the system, the effects aren't neutral. They flow upward in time. Assets rise faster than wages. Savings fall behind prices. And the gap widens. Every bailout, every stimulus, every emergency measure, short-term relief for the present, Long-term costs for the future. This is not conspiracy, it's arithmetic. And now we arrive at the labor market. Boomers entered jobs with defined paths. Loyalty was rewarded. Productivity gains were shared. Unions had power. Careers lasted decades. Today, jobs are flexible, disposable, optimized for shareholders. Productivity still rises, but wages don't follow. Benefits shrink. Stability disappears. Yet, young workers are told the same story. Work harder, save more, be patient. But patience doesn't compound when the base keeps eroding. This is why frustration is rising. Not because younger generations are lazy, but because they're playing a game where the rules were changed before they sat down. And here's the most important part. Most boomers don't see this as theft. They see it as normal, earned, deserved. From their perspective, they followed the rules, and they did. The problem is that the rules were never updated, even after it was obvious who would pay the price. Systems don't collapse because of villains. They collapse because of incentives that reward inaction. And now we're reaching the point where the math no longer works. Debt can't grow faster than the economy forever. Benefits can't exceed contributions indefinitely. Housing can't outrun incomes without consequences. Something has to give. The question is not whether younger generations were disadvantaged. The question is whether the system will adjust or break. Because when a society protects the past at the expense of the future eventually pushes back. And when it does, the correction is never gentle. That's where we are now. And in the next part, I'll show you what happens next, how this imbalance resolves itself, who pays the final bill, and why the outcome is already set in motion. By now you can probably feel it, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Because once you see how the system actually works, you can't unsee it. And the hardest part isn't anger. It's realizing how quiet the theft was. No villain speeches, no dramatic collapse. Just decades of small, legal decisions that slowly shifted risk downward and reward upward. Here's where the story gets uncomfortable. The people who benefited most from this system weren't cartoon villains. They were homeowners, retirees, voters, parents. And that's what makes this so difficult to talk about, because the biggest transfer of opportunity in modern history didn't happen through malice. It happened through incentives. After World War II, the United States built an economic engine unlike anything the world had seen. High growth, cheap housing, stable jobs, guaranteed pensions, rising wages. If you were born into that window, the math worked in your favor almost automatically. You didn't need perfect decisions. You just needed to exist. Housing prices rose faster than inflation. Education was affordable. Debt was manageable. Returns compounded quietly. But systems don't stay balanced forever. And instead of adjusting when the math began to break, the country did something else. It protected the people already inside the system. As growth slowed rather than allowing asset prices to reset, policymakers chose stimulus. Lower rates, more credit, easier borrowing. Every time the system threatened to correct, it was padded. And each padding made one thing happen. Assets went up, wages didn't. That gap is everything. Because when asset prices rise faster than incomes, ownership becomes inheritance-based, not effort-based. If you owned a home early, your wealth grew without extra work. If you didn't, the ladder pulled away faster than you could climb. This is how generational math breaks, not through laziness, not through irresponsibility, but through timing. And here's the cruelest part. Once a system shifts into asset inflation, reversing it becomes politically impossible. Because falling asset prices feel like loss to those who already own them. So policies keep favoring appreciation over affordability, protection over access, stability for holders over opportunity for entrants. The system stops asking, "Is this fair?" and starts asking, "Who would be angry if we changed it?" That's why housing never truly corrects. That's why education costs never fall. That's why retirement obligations grow while younger workers are told to figure it out. It's not a conspiracy. It's arithmetic mixed with democracy. Large voting blocks protect their balance sheets, and the cost is quietly transferred forward to people who don't vote as much, don't own assets yet, don't have leverage. This is why younger generations feel like they're running uphill on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. They aren't imagining it. They are paying higher prices for the same outcomes, with fewer guarantees. More debt for less security, more work for less ownership, more risk for fewer buffers. And the system explains it away by saying, just work harder. Just invest earlier. Just make better choices. But the math doesn't care about motivation. If wages grow at 2% and housing grows at 7%, effort cannot close that gap. If education costs triple while returns flatten, discipline cannot fix that mismatch. If retirement shifts from guaranteed to self-funded, while markets become more volatile, responsibility alone isn't enough. This is why so many people feel like they're doing everything right and still falling behind. Because they are playing a game whose starting conditions changed, without being told. And here's where the story usually breaks down. People want a villain, a generation, a group to blame. But blame is useless. What matters is clarity. Because while you didn't choose the math, you are living inside it, and pretending the system is neutral only makes it more dangerous. Once you see the structure, the question stops being, who caused this? And becomes, how do I survive it? That's where power comes back, not through rage, through adaptation. Understanding that the old promises no longer apply forces you to stop relying on them. The idea that loyalty guarantees security, that degrees guarantee stability, that home ownership automatically equals freedom. Those assumptions were true once. They are conditional now, which means the strategy must change. Not by copying the past, but by recognizing its limits. The people who will thrive going forward won't be the ones waiting for fairness to return. They'll be the ones who understand that systems don't care about morality, only incentives. They'll minimize exposure to inflated essentials. They'll build flexibility instead of fixed costs. They'll treat debt like a tool, not a crutch. They'll prioritize mobility over status. Not because it's noble, because the math demands it. This isn't pessimism, it's realism. And realism is empowering when you stop fighting it. Because once you stop expecting the system to save you, you stop making decisions that depend on it. You stop assuming tomorrow will resemble yesterday. You stop anchoring your future to rules written for another era. And that's where something unexpected happens. You regain agency, not total control, but strategic control. Enough to protect yourself, enough to avoid the worst traps, enough to stop paying invisible premiums just for existing. That's not victory, but it's freedom. And freedom starts with seeing the cage clearly, not pretending it isn't there. Here's the truth most people never hear. You were never meant to win this version of the game by default. You were meant to adapt. The moment you understand that, the system loses its psychological hold, because it can no longer confuse you into self-blame. And that changes everything. If this made you uncomfortable, that's a good thing. Discomfort means you're seeing the system clearly for the first time. None of this was meant to be fair, and it was never designed for you to win by accident. But awareness is leverage. Once you understand how the game was set up, you can stop playing it the way they expect you to. You can make different choices, smarter ones, long-term ones. So tell me in the comments, do you think this future was inevitable or engineered? And if you want more videos that expose the systems shaping your money, your work, and your life, subscribe now. What you learn next might matter more than you think.